Hi, Professor Cohn, and whoever's going to end up watching this. I'm sure there'll be a massive crowd. I want to begin by thanking you, Professor Cohn, for giving me a chance to present to you via video and being so flexible and understanding, especially when I wasn't feeling well. You really gave me the space to be able to spend time to feel better and recuperate, so I could really be able to show up for this presentation and really feel like I was putting my best foot forward. So one of the most incredible aspects of a journey is how that journey is contextualized throughout history. Stories have become a massive part of not just my religious life, and they haven't just taken over and been the most inspiring moments in many of the transformative aspects of my growth as a person. They have been, throughout history, one of the most consistently formed ways of communicating feelings and thoughts. Stories have been a mode of communication that has transcended throughout every single continent, throughout every single language, and through every single nation. And yet, if stories are so powerful, something has to reveal itself. Is it possible that there is a correct and most ideal way of telling the story? Is there a way to take the powerful message of a story and wrap it in the most effective method that will teach and give over the information necessary? So if you look at past experiments, especially one by Cow and Decker, they ask one question. If we're trying to take a story and use it to identify with a character, or in this case a victim, would we be able to distinguish between the value of communicating a story in first and third person? The origins of this discussion, even though they were recently produced in a study about narrative transportation done by you, about the ability for stories and other aspects of media to be transmitted into content, has a little bit of value in terms of how deep a person is transported into that narrative. And is there an exact way of calculating and comprehending how deep someone got into a story, how moved they were by the sentences and the words they were reading, and how close they were connected to the character they were reading about? So Cow and Decker did an experiment in which they took text that focused on a woman who was abused by her spouse, and also added an extra dimension of filling in certain readers with much more emotional expression that would bring one closer to the subject. And what they were able to find is that for those who were reading the story in first person and grew closer emotionally, they were given content that allowed them to see details that were more focused on the emotions of the character. They actually felt much more sympathetic than those who received the story in the third person and weren't given as much private detail about the emotional health of the subject. That was very interesting, because you'd think that the first person narrative would be one that could connect the viewer much more to what was going on. It turns out that for the actual project that Cow and Decker were publicizing, people who read the story in third person contributed more money to helping victims of spousal abuse than those in the first story, who seemed to grow a little bit anxious and angry with the first person character that they were becoming connected to. Taking that also and building on it, there's an experiment done by Koss in 2009 that explained that teenagers were able to connect to characters in a much deeper way depending on what perspective the story was being read in. Using these foundations, my group and I decided to go to the bottom and the deepest point of what a story really means through the way it's communicated. What we want to seek and find out, our guiding question was, if a story is told in a certain person or from a certain perspective, can it affect the way we're narratively transported, can it affect the way that we retain content, can it affect the presence we have when we're reading the story, and can it affect the focus we have on the development and the connection to the character. So what we did is, there's a data collection at YU, and we had 84 students come in groups of 12 who were taking our research experiment for half a credit towards their research component of their grade. And we first showed them a clip from the movie Titanic. What we wanted to do is, because the story we were giving out was from the Titanic event, we wanted to emotionally prime people and give a certain context for the emotions that were going to be displayed. So we showed them a scene from the end of the movie. The ship is collapsing. People know that this is the end. Water is going everywhere. People are falling off the boat. There's sad music playing in the background. People's lives are crumbling on the screen. There had to be something moving to provide a context. After they saw the movie, they were given on sheets of paper. The two groups were given the story. One group was given the story in first person, the other group was given the story in third person. The group in first person and third person got the same exact story and the same exact details. The only difference was the pronoun. In our group, we respect the pronouns. So what happened was, we had an hypothesis that if the story is read in the first person, with an I mentality, with an I connection, with this sense of identification, a person would be able to retain much more information, be much more present, and feel much more narratively transported. After the students read the text, our hypothesis was tested. The students filled out a survey. And in the survey, there were different categories of questions. One was focused on narrative transportation. One was focused on content retention. One was focused on character development. And one was just focused on engagement. After seeing the results, we took one student's answers away because they admitted that they were not focused, even though we attempted and gave a speech before every single group was tested. We gave a speech that it was important they be serious. There was one person who did not meet our expectations and was skewing the data with a certain lethargic and nonsensical perspective in the way they were taking the test, purposely getting the answers wrong. So now that we have 83 students, we tested and found that there was significance in terms of students being more focused and being more narratively transported, but there was no difference between the two groups in terms of content they related to and between engagement. And why is this significant? It's very, very simple. The results show that our hypothesis was half correct. When you read something in the first person, you become much more a part of the story. But you don't know the information much better. You just maybe are able to get a better emotional grasp of what's going on in the story. Actually, one of the things that we measured for was if the students believed the story was real. And those in the first person had a slight more advantage in believing the story did actually happen. The story followed a woman named Leah Axe as she went through the Titanic. She survived the catastrophe, but the reason why the story was so important is because the story focused much on Leah's character development and Leah's ability to express her emotional needs while she was chasing to find her child, while she was surviving the wreckage, while she was meeting other people, and big decisions were being made on the ship. So the discussion that we could really have to conclude the experiment is that, using the results that we had in the experiment that we did, is that this experiment could go in many future directions. One thing we could do is we could just test a different demographic. If the boys were learning about a girl in this past experiment, maybe the males would learn about a female, maybe the males would learn about other males in a future experiment. And vice versa, if we tested females, would there be a difference between the emotional connection and narrative transportation in terms of narrative perspective with different genders? One thing we could have also done is we could have tested and made a distracting factor. One thing we could have also done, and I think for next time this would be ideal, is because many speeches are given verbally and could be understood in an auditory way, maybe we would record a story in both the first person and third person and see who was more engaged and who could retain more content and if there was narrative transportation. So I really hope in the future we can build on more experience from the inspiration we gained from this semester, and I really enjoyed this experiment. I just wanted to thank you and all of my group, even though they're not here, for contributing to much of my knowledge on this topic and for really empowering me to go deeper in the world of psychology. Thank you.